Greetings, parasite ecologists, and welcome to the very first lecture in the Parasite Ecology video series. You might be wondering, what exactly am I getting myself into? I want to use this brief lecture to talk about what you can expect. One thing I can promise you is that you are going to get to know the dark side of biology. You've been on Earth for a few years at this point. You've probably gotten familiar with at least one ecosystem, some seascape or landscape. And in the process of doing that, you probably learned about the free-living species that occur there. But my guess is that you haven't learned about the parasites that live there, and that's because parasites exist on a totally different plane of reality. They're inside or on these large observable species, and so they're kind of in this alternate dimension, one that we rarely bother to notice. They exist just under the surface of everything that's visible and familiar to you, and they're also ubiquitous. I guarantee that whatever ecosystem you're familiar with, there are plenty of parasites there, hidden just under the surface. Now, there are hundreds of thousands of parasites in the world, and less than 4% of those species infect people. I'm going to do my best to allocate our attention as evenly as possible, but there's one caveat I need to give you right up front. A lot of research in parasitology and parasite ecology has been done on those parasites that affect people. Why? Well, people are selfish. We like doing and funding research on the parasites that affect us, and to some extent, our domestic animals and livestock. We're less interested in understanding the parasites of wildlife, which I think is silly considering that wildlife species host the vast majority of the parasites that exist in this world. Now, that's not to say that there isn't some really good information out there on wildlife parasites, and we're going to cover some of that in later videos. I just want to set the expectation right up front that we are going to cover a number of human parasites, and that's in part because that is where the richest amount of information on parasite ecology exists. It might be hard to believe, but 40% of animals are parasites. Let me say that one more time. 40% of the animal species on the face of the planet are parasites. And despite this, it's pretty common for biology majors and even zoology majors to get their degrees without hearing a peep about parasites. And that is a crazy state of affairs. I was once in that boat. I had never taken a parasite course when I started graduate school. I think the lack of education on parasites at the K through 12 and undergraduate levels gives parasites really short shrift, considering their ubiquity, their ecological importance, and their extreme diversity. How extreme is their diversity? Well, parasites are distributed all across the tree of life. This is a figure from a study by Sarah Weinstein and Armand Kuris, who set out to count the number of independent evolutionary origins of parasitism. In green are all the metazoa, which includes all the multicellular animals, both free-living and parasitic. In orange are the arthropods, a branch within the metazoa. And in purple are the insects, a branch within the arthropods. On the right side of this figure, the length of the branch indicates the number of times that parasitism has evolved in that branch. The exact number of independent evolutionary origins of parasitism is in parentheses next to the name of the group. The darker the branches, the greater the proportion of parasites among the species in that branch. And with that all in mind, we can step back and see that what this plot is showing us is that parasitism has evolved in a bunch of different branches of the tree of life. Look across all of those green metazoans, and you'll see a number of branches that each contain many independent evolutionary origins of parasitism. Parasitism has evolved 10 separate times among the mollusks, 13 times among the flatworms, 18 times among the nematodes, and a staggering 143 times among the arthropods. If you tally up all of these independent origins of parasitism, we find out something really surprising. Within the animal tree of life, parasitism has independently evolved 223 times across 15 different phyla. 223 times natural selection has drawn out a parasitic species from a free-living ancestor. So parasitism is a really common way of life, having evolved a number of times, and there's a reason that parasitism has evolved so many times. It is a very profitable way to live. There are 4 broad parasitic groups that we're going to cover in the course of these videos. The first are the flatworms, the phylum Platyhelminthes, including the flukes and the tapeworms. The second are the nematodes, phylum Nematoda, otherwise known as roundworms, a group that includes many familiar intestinal worms, but also lots of others. The third, the arthropods in the phylum Arthropoda, include the crustaceans, insects, and mites. And finally, the protozoa, including the amoebae, flagellates, ciliates, and the apicomplexans. The first 3 of these clades are metazoan parasites, or multicellular animal parasites, and the final one is a group of protozoa. Now, we truly cannot talk about the parasites without talking about their impact on people. Each year, about 14% of all deaths globally are due to infectious disease. That is, they're caused when people are infected by viral, bacterial, protozoal, or metazoan parasites. These diseases mostly affect very poor people, and the diseases don't receive research or philanthropy that matches the scale of the problem. These are preventable diseases that we are doing a very bad job at preventing. We call them the neglected tropical diseases. The Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation tallies up the burden of these diseases every year. In the most recent year for which data are available, 2021, here are the burdens for each neglected tropical disease. This is basically a square pie chart showing the proportion of the total global burden due to each cause. The plot is based on DALYs, or disability-adjusted life years. This is a metric that's used by public health specialists to measure the burden of disease. It's equal to the years of healthy life lost due to infection, either because the infection killed or disabled the patient. So the bigger the square, the bigger the burden. What you'll notice is that the bulk of this health burden is from malaria, a disease caused by a protozoan parasite that we will cover in a later video. Another big chunk is dengue, a viral parasite that we'll cover at the very end of this series. But we also see a number of metazoan or animal parasites, including the flatworms that cause schistosomiasis and cysticercosis, the nematodes that cause ascariasis, hookworm disease, trichuriasis, and the filarial nematodes that cause lymphatic filariasis and onchocerciasis. These are the parasitic diseases that increased in burden in the 30 years before 2021. It includes this catch-all category of other neglected tropical diseases, but also dengue, cysticercosis, and cutaneous leishmaniasis. These are the parasitic diseases that declined in burden in the 30 years before 2021, and that includes malaria, schistosomiasis, ascariasis, hookworm disease, lymphatic filariasis, and many others. Let's zoom in for a moment on one helminth, just a fancy word for worm. This is the human roundworm, Ascaris lumbricoides, which causes the disease ascariasis. This worm inhabits the human gut, and it can reach lengths of 40 centimeters or 15 inches. And it infects 1.5 billion people today. Most of those 1.5 billion are among the poorest of the poor, people living in the global south. But it's not at all uncommon in the global north. So no matter where you're watching from, it could be in the room with you right now, maybe even in your own gut. Speaking of your gut, there's one last thing that I can guarantee you if you stick with me through this video series. Your dinner conversations are going to be enriched forever. You will from now on be that person who no one wants to sit next to at a meal because you're going to point out all the potential parasites that could be in that forkful of food that your dinner companion is about to enjoy. Because parasites are everywhere, as you learn about them, you're going to see them everywhere. Of course, humans aren't the only hosts that have their very own special roundworm. While humans have Ascaris lumbricoides, raccoons have Balis ascaris procyanus, and sperm whales have Placentonema gigantissima, which can grow to almost 30 feet long. Throughout these videos, we'll cover lots of human-infecting parasites and discuss the need for more research attention to be paid to the neglected tropical diseases, especially to the diseases caused by metazoan parasites. But we'll have these periodic reminders that humans aren't the only hosts in the world, and there's a whole universe of tens of thousands of parasite species out there in nature doing their parasite thing. I'm so excited to introduce you to these worms and other parasites. I'll see you in the next video.